Hi, this is Pat McDonald, your host for Vote for Vermont, where our tagline is listening beyond the soundbites. Today, I have two very special guests who have been working at the State House all day today on the issue of abortion. Joining me is Mary Beerworth, who is from the Vermont Right to Life Committee, and Joe Patrici, who is an advocate for the vulnerable. Thank you both for joining me. And Mary, I wasn't going to ask if it was just you, but could you do a little background of who you are?
Yeah, a little is a good idea.
Joe, so
sure. So I am Mary Hahn Beerworth, and I'm the Executive Director of Vermont Right to Life. This is my 26th year.
Wow, bless you.
Yeah, and I live in Fairfax, Vermont with my husband. We have 4 married children and 10 grandchildren.
Oh, I am so envious. Do you start shopping for Christmas on January 1st, I think? And joining us, as I said, is Joe Patrici. Joe and I worked together for a year or two back in the day. Could you talk a little bit about yourself and why you're here?
Sure. I'm an advocate for the vulnerable, as you said. I spent my whole working life in public service.
Right.
I worked as a corrections commissioner. I've worked as the deputy commissioner for economic services. I've had direct service roles with all kinds of people, and for the last 8 years before I retired in June, I was the executive director of Northeast Kingdom Community Action. Oh. So it's really been service to the vulnerable, the disadvantaged, the disenfranchised, and I'm here because of all the vulnerable populations. I think that the unwanted unborn child is up in the most vulnerable and doesn't really have a voice in this equation here with the Bill H-57. So I wanted to advocate for some things about what's going on here.
I thought that was great, and what you said was great at the press conference that Vermont Right to Life held the other day. That was good. I said, hey, I know that guy.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that between your job and your former job as corrections, tough jobs you two have picked out for yourselves. But today and yesterday, and it is February 21st today. I had the 20 down. 21st today, and there has been debate on the floor. Yesterday was what they call the second reading of the bill, and there were about 30 some odd amendments, I understood. And I know these two were at present. I listened to it at home on VPR. Great service, by the way, if you ever want to check out what the House and the Senate is doing. And then they have the vote last night, and it passed slightly overwhelmingly, strictly party lines, although I heard one Democrat
broke ranks.
Who was that?
Forgeit's from Springfield, I believe.
Good
yeah.
for
Yeah.
her or him?
It's a him.
Him, oh, well, thank you. Good for him. And then today was what they call the third reading of the bill, and it's still going on now, so I'm very appreciative our guests are here. I left and started listening to it on VPR. I must say I was just a little depressed. For those of you who know, I try to run this show pretty neutral, but if you've been reading my Facebook, you know I'm not neutral about this issue, so I'm going to say it up front. And next week, I have Lucy LaRiche coming from Planned Parenthood, so we're bringing the other side of the debate to you. But I may not be able to keep quiet about how I feel, because I've been on Facebook 24/7.
It must mean you're a human being.
I must be. I hope so. Thank you for that. So let's talk about, Mary, what are we hearing? Not one amendment passed yesterday or so far today.
Well, I think the debate, what's happening on the floor and what's happened in committee is a complete unbalanced and unfair and unimpartial debate over H-57. And it's become clear over the last 2 days that this isn't about the right to choose. This is only about abortion. And it is being driven by Planned Parenthood, who you will have on next week. They are the largest providers of abortions in the state of Vermont, the United States of America, and in the world. And they have a political stake in this game. They also have a financial stake. So it's interesting, and I want your listeners to understand that yesterday, every single lawmaker got a threat from Planned Parenthood that
somebody mentioned that on the floor.
They did. They were horrified. And we're not talking about people who are pro-life or legislators.
Right.
These are our pro-choice legislators who are trying to find a balance.
Right.
Joe brings an incredible balance to the conversation, and it's an honor to be on your show with him. But that he represents those people looking for a way through the two sides.
Right.
And so for Planned Parenthood to threaten to score them not only on how they voted, but any comments on the floor and any votes on amendments.
Yeah.
So they got the backup of some legislators. But that's the power and the grip that Planned Parenthood has on our state house.
Yeah. There's got to be, and maybe it's just Planned Parenthood and the funding that they bring, they are not willing to change a thing. This is the most open-ended bill I have ever seen. And they keep saying that it's what is in effect now. Maybe you can explain to people what was unlegislated and in effect and what they're trying to do.
Sure. So Vermont actually legalized abortion a full year before Roe v. Wade with a Supreme Court case called Beecham versus Leahy. And that Leahy is the Patrick Leahy, who's today a U.S. Senator. He admits on his website that he did not present a case any kind of formal opposition to legalizing abortion. So basically, Beecham v. Leahy granted that a woman, there was nothing in statute that a woman couldn't have an abortion, so it was natural that a doctor should be able to provide her one. So, of course, naturally, after a breathtaking decision like that, you turn to the legislature to put some parameters around it, because that left it without even that a doctor should provide the procedure. Absolutely nothing, no restrictions. But before anything could be done in statute in Vermont, Roe versus Wade was handed down, and legalizing abortion in all 50 states. In the next 46 years, Roe v. Wade challenges were brought to Roe v. Wade, and essentially what the court decided, as parental notification came up to the court, and they agreed that a minor could involve her parents, or the clinic could ask for permission from the parents. And case after case after case. And for me, it established clearly once Casey versus Planned Parenthood was heard in 1992. It was Sandra Day O'Connor who essentially said states have the right and the ability to prefer childbirth over abortion in statute. So the reverse is what we're watching unfold here in Vermont, is that Vermont is choosing to prefer abortion over childbirth. I mean, and it's obvious in every single amendment, trying to protect women, trying to offer alternatives, informed consent, parental notification. They've all been just unilaterally knocked down. So,
Joe, what was your impression sitting through the last 2 days of all the amendments and what you've heard, and their resistance to making any reasonable change?
I think that, sort of what Ann Donahue said at the beginning of one of the things she offered today was that this is not, there's a sense of absolutism here. There's not really a debate going on. And I've worked with the legislature before in some of my roles, but not as the legislator, but in watching this last night and today, and in testifying before the committee and Human Services Committee, it's really clear that a lot of people have basically dug their feet and made their minds up. They don't want to hear any facts, any narrative, or anything. They just really want to get this done, and they want to move forward with it. It's totally unrestricted abortion, right to choose. There's no recognition at all of the life that's evolving within the woman. So there's two people really who have rights here.
Right.
My real big problem with what's going on with this is that, and again, I think Ann also offered another amendment that speaks to sort of what is a set of values.
Right.
I mean, we're Vermonters, and the question I have is, what are your values around this? So you have the value of protecting a vulnerable woman and her right to choose. I get that. But the dehumanization of the fetus, and common sense, everybody understands. Biologically, common sense is that all things being equal, 9 months after conception, more or less, there's going to be a baby.
Right.
And I hear people, in the legislature debate this as if it's some kind of mystical
They
experience.
did it today about
even a doctor.
What is, what was that?
It's like,
We'll have to get to that in a minute.
I told the Human Services Committee, I said, this is some kind of trick of deception here, self-deception.
Right.
It's not rocket science. We all know this to be a fact. So there's two competing interests going on here. So my thinking is like, as Vermonters, we really need to embrace both the value of the mother and the unwanted unborn child, and see how we can protect both of them. Now, I understand that it ultimately is going to be an either-or situation with women who really want to make the choice to abort.
Right.
But my contention is that there are some things that can be done
Of course.
and with a common sense point of view that can end up limiting the number of abortions. You can still have the choice for abortion to choose,
Right.
but to limit the number of abortions so that at least we can do that. Because basically the statement of values right now on the table goes like this to me. The only human lives that we value are the ones we choose to have in terms of the children. And the ones that we don't choose to have, they're disposable,
Right.
they're disregarded, and they're not human.
Right.
So anytime you just dehumanize any population, whether it's migrants, women, people who are gay, people who are of different color,
Right.
when you dehumanize a group of people, they don't exist anymore, and you can objectify them, and you can hate them, you can dispose of them, and that's what's going on here.
Right.
And what I really, what Ann Downahue said today was, let's be honest.
Right.
Let's have an honest discussion about this. This dishonesty or deception that fetuses don't have rights and that they don't really exist or have to exist in this bill, it confuses things. Let's address it head on, and let's do things like advocate for adoption,
Well, that's my
advocate
thing.
for birth control for young childbearing females so they
Right.
don't end up getting pregnant.
Right.
And advocate for free birth control, for really making it part of required sex education,
Right.
to really get them on board for this, so that they don't get in the game and get caught, and so that they know how to play the game. People go, well, that'll make children promiscuous. Well, they're already going to become promiscuous when we all have experimented when we were young,
Right.
pubescent children. But we're too young to have children, and we're too young to make this decision. And so another whole area of conversation is parental notification.
Yeah.
Another whole area of conversation is late-term abortions.
Yeah.
When I found out that 24 weeks was supposedly the threshold, isn't that 6 months?
Yeah.
6 months, my God.
It's more than 6 months.
Yeah.
But
That's the threshold for viability,
Yeah.
so a
But,
baby that can survive.
and
Yeah,
e-
right.
even
and
that-
sometimes even I know my friend had a baby. They used to put warm water in a doctor's glove because the baby fit in this doctor's
Yeah.
glove and now she's taller than me, and she's
Oh,
thriving
that's a
and
beautiful
she's
story.
amazing.
But I think that's also another, I don't know, it's sort of another kind of way to get out of the honesty of what's really going on here. To me, it doesn't matter whether it's 24 weeks
Right.
or 2 weeks. It's going to all end up in the same place, all things being equal. I mean, there are some fetuses that aren't going to make it, but we all know that it's going to happen.
The one that really I think was
Some point.
the most powerful thing on the negative side is when they said a viable a fetus is not a person under the law.
Well, there's a lot of ways that an unborn child is recognized under the law. I mean, you can
I thought
you
they
can will.
eliminated that.
Oh, I see what you're saying. They did take one line
Didn't they
out.
took out that
Yes,
said, sorry, you're not real.
they did take out a line. They gave no individual rights to
Right,
an unborn child. So
right.
they took that out, but very clearly, Chair of House Human Services Committee said, we all understand putting it in or taking it out makes no difference. So understand that they are trying to make sure there are no rights.
So if
in
a
law.
8-9-month pregnant woman gets killed in a drunken driving accident and the baby dies, too bad.
And then even worse is if the abusive boyfriend doesn't want the
right,
baby and
just
kicks
goes-
her in the stomach,
Yeah.
stabs her. In New York, that just happened. She was stabbed to death herself, but he
read that.
stabbed the baby as
Right.
well. And so there's now in New York, they stripped their law down to unrestricted abortion. And so now there is no recourse in the law for that murderer to pay a criminal penalty for killing the
kicking
baby.
his child.
Yeah, killing
There's
his child.
a real irony going on here, which is that I know a lot of these people in the legislature. They're good people.
Yeah.
And I've known them for years and worked with them for years, over the years. And the irony is that the very people who are really for this unrestricted abortion law have been the most effective advocates for the vulnerable, the homeless,
Right.
the
Disabled.
the disabled,
Right.
the disenfranchised, the mothers and children on welfare, the people in jail who can, with the right help, make it and restart their lives, people who are drug addicted and alcoholic,
Right.
people who are sick, people who need health care.
Mentally ill, which is a huge problem.
These are advocates for all, and what's confusing is how did we get to a place
Right.
where the fetus,
Right.
who's unseen and unborn and unwanted, not only doesn't have a voice, but isn't even recognized
Right.
as an entity,
The viable.
as you know.
It
So
drives me crazy because it's one breath away from being a
Yeah.
living, breathing
Yeah.
human being. I don't understand it. What was the discussion? And after I left, I heard it on VPR. Somebody said that when the sperm, it's at the moment of conception, they were arguing when that is, because if the sperm and the egg meet, that may not be conception. So how do you know when conception is? What was that argument?
Well, I know.
I don't
And
even know
they're
who
going
was
up
that?
against a body of medical evidence and proof. But in a nutshell, this is biological fact.
Right.
The moment of conception is the beginning of a new life, and the beginning of pregnancy is when that implants.
Right.
So it's just.
And that's all the
it's-
test is when the little sperm.
I mean.
I thought, my God, and what were they arguing? It could be a tumor.
It's
Well,
again,
then-
it's again a trick of self-deception, and it is dishonest because, I mean, the idea of you wouldn't have to have an abortion if there wasn't a fetus growing to become a baby.
Right.
Come on.
Right.
And and we all know that that once you have conception, there's going to be a child 9
Right.
months later. So it's not to me, it's not debatable. It's a convenient way of trying to justify what's going on here.
Right.
Now I understand the need is really powerful for women to advocate for their own reproductive rights, and I get that. I mean, it's very powerful, but it really bothers me that it has to be at the total dehumanization
Right.
of the life that's growing inside them.
Right.
And
At what point does motherhood kick in? Where does this women's right thing, I got interviewed the other day by a high school kid, and I think she was a little surprised at my answer. You have a responsibility if you go to bed with somebody, protection or not. You have responsibility. You may get pregnant. There's a responsibility there. You have to know you went to bed and
Right.
had sex, and things are happening to your body.
Well, I'd love to tell you this because I do speak with a lot of women who regret their abortions, and they don't feel they were offered alternatives.
Right.
They were under extraordinary pressure. Those who have the most to gain by her abortion are often a boyfriend who doesn't want to pay child
Right.
support,
Right.
Embarrassment, college education in the middle of college, doesn't want to tell parents. So they're under a kind of pressure that is frantic, and I understand that. But the
Right.
sad part for me is invariably these women later come to me and
Regret
say, Mary, I just felt I had
Because
no
there was
choice."
no help for them or support.
Well,
And
that's right.
I've been told there's plenty of support here in Vermont, but I don't know where it is.
I don't see it.
I was arguing with one of the legislators. There's plenty of. I said, tell me
No.
where. Where do I go if I'm for
Some-
help?
Some
serious help.
colleges where the girls show up pregnant, it's the most vulnerable time. They're being
Right.
exposed to a lot of behaviors that they were maybe protected from while they were living at home. And all of a sudden there's a lot of drinking and there's a lot of encouragement for sexual activity. There are some colleges that have that worked in. They've got childcare and they're going to keep her on track for her
good.
education. That's a real choice.
That's great.
That's a real
Yeah.
choice, you know. You say we can work with you and your baby.
Because I must say, I'm old, and so I was around way before Roe versus Wade, and I had two friends who got abortions in the back alley. One of them was okay, but the other one was, just came sick, almost died. It was terrible. And I went with them and took care of them and that sort of stuff. And I wrote in a Facebook page what if a child comes home from having an abortion and you don't know it, and there's mom sleeping, all of a sudden in the middle of the night the kid's carrying on,
But can we make sure that you're describing for your listeners that that's a legal abortion? That's now.
Right.
And then there was a testimony from several women who had had multiple abortions in the public hearing the other night, one of whom was promised that she would be able to have a child when she wanted one, but they destroyed her fertility with with injuring her fallopian tubes. And so she says to this day, these are her words, I killed the only baby I was ever going to have.
Yeah.
So some of these stories are just a heartbreaker. But
my
this
friend
is
was never able to
modern
have.
day.
She was just hacked to shreds.
Yeah, well, things have changed, because you and I are all both in the same sort of neighborhood.
Thanks for noticing.
But, you know, I mean, back in the old days, if you got pregnant, it was a secret. And you got sent away. It was a stigma, and all that. It wasn't talked about, and all that stuff. And now it's a really different
climate.
You know, and it's upfront, but there's still a lot of conflict about this is going to hijack my life economically. My worry about the current situation is that, you know, with unrestricted abortion, it becomes too easy to use it as birth control.
Right, exactly.
So I'm pregnant, so I can just go have this taken care of. There's nothing to really go, wait a minute now. I'm pregnant and I've got a serious decision to make here. So, you know, is there an independent advocate or an independent counselor I can talk to that's not part of the you know, the healthcare industry that's going to perform the abortion, so there is no bias here. Can there be an advocate for adoption, not to coerce it, but an independent advocate to say, here's the process, and can there be some incentives to carry the child to term and to give it to people who might really want the child, and you know, can there be some parameters around the process for making the decision so that we can end up with fewer abortions and people can end up in a place where they get to this decision after going through these decision points and reality checks and talking to people. So that's what I'm proposing, is that we have those checks and balances, not to restrict it, but to make the choice more informed and to make the choice, forgive the word, more viable.
And I think that in workplace, if a single woman's pregnant, it's not that stigma. Maybe there's someplace, but wherever I've worked, it's like, congratulations, you have showers, and are you okay? And it just is. And nobody that I know or have been, and that's not that stigma that it used to be years ago. My God, your parents have.
Oh, yeah, we've moved a long way since then. But what's happening is inside the State House and outside the State House. So outside the State House, people have an attitude much more like Joe.
Right.
And we did public opinion polling, and we found that they want all kinds of options brought to women. So Planned Parenthood and the lobbying advocates for this bill are misunderstanding that when someone self-identifies as pro-choice, that they agree with their agenda of unlimited, unrestricted abortion. No, big numbers for parental notification, big numbers for informed consent, numbers that are large for no more after, you know, second viability, second trimester and third trimester abortion. So it's a misread of the public, and there's a simmering anger out there.
Somebody
now,
told me.
Experience.
Yes. Somebody told me it's 1 to 9 of the phone calls coming in to the State House, pro 1, 9 against.
Because this is serious. So we've had, by default, from a court case in 1972, this unrestricted and unregulated abortion on demand. But now they want to codify that in law. So that's a proactive.
And how embarrassing. They want it in our Constitution.
I know that's coming now.
I am seriously,
yeah, but there's some problems with
the
current bill is you know, I mean, for example, it doesn't codify it might codify
current practice.
Current practice, but it doesn't really. I'm not sure it codifies. I mean, what it allows for example, is that, you know, unrestricted abortion means that any elective abortion, regardless of a medical reason, can be performed from conception all the way till 9 months. That's not okay. And so that's not the current reality or the current law.
One of the legislators told me today out in the
And the other thing that bothers me is, we heard that people really balked at regulating the healthcare centers that
right.
that perform these abortions
Right.
because 90% of the data says 90% of women who have abortions is safe. Well, what about the other 10%?
Right. Oh,
You
too
know,
bad
come
for
on.
them.
So, my point is that nobody, the great coalition in the legislature, at least in the House, their ears were closed.
Right.
They had their minds made up. No amount of debate,
Right.
in my view, from watching what was going on here
It
over
was
the last
pretty
month,
sad.
was going to change their minds. They
Right.
were not going to listen to anything. And I also get that what's going on in Washington with the administration and with the potential Supreme Court and everything is scary. It is
So
scary.
is that why
you
they
know?
want it so open? Because they're afraid of what Washington's going to do?
Well, they
I
say
think it's-
that.
I think it's an extreme
Right.
reaction.
Because yesterday, they yelled at one of the legislators who had an amendment, and they said, "You are reacting to something that hasn't happened out of fear." And I'm like, and what are you doing reacting to Washington? Nothing's happened, and you're doing the same thing out of fear.
But when
double standard.
But I think when I say it's a reaction, I think there is concern. I mean, about what's happening in Washington. But I think it's an extreme reaction to go in a totally unrestricted. We have a chance here to create
right.
a thoughtful,
Good. Right.
logical, reasonable, balanced, values-based
Right.
abortion law that really is inclusive of both the evolving unwanted unborn
Right.
child as well as the rights to protect the reproductive rights of the mothers.
Right.
We have a chance to do that, and that's not happening.
He's
Well,
exactly
Mary
right.
knows I am supportive, and I know Planned Parenthood isn't, but we talk, we're friends. I'm very supportive of the first 3-month trimester, and before all the heartbeat and the pain, and when was it 14 weeks is the baby can feel pain, something.
They place it around 20 weeks.
Oh, do they?
But,
Oh, okay.
but it's important to understand that nothing is happening unless that little heart is beating. So right away, there's a rudimentary heart. So they'll say we can detect that heartbeat at 6 weeks, but it's been beating all along.
I
So
think
that's very important.
even- it's even worse.
beating regularly at 21 days. I wanted to add to something he's saying here too, because so the fear is that Roe v. Wade will be overturned, but experts are saying that's not going to happen
No,
soon.
yeah.
Even then, as we talked about, Roe v. Wade is overturned, it goes back to legal abortion in Vermont.
Right.
So we had a lot of time to
that's the
do just
Leahy
what you
issue?
said. The Beecham v. Leahy case,
Yeah, okay,
which
because
legalized
that's what I was told
Yeah.
and apparently it was said on the floor. This what we're doing is moot. Why are we doing this? Because it's a fallback
And at least
position.
doing it in a rush.
Yeah.
Like Joe said, we had a chance to do a thoughtful policy.
Yeah.
Hear from all sides. We were not allowed to testify as Vermont Right to Life in the House Judiciary Committee. They had massive amount of testimony from the ACLU
Yeah.
and from Planned Parenthood, and so it was a very one-sided debate.
I found it interesting today. Every answer they gave about why they voted no for the resolution for the amendments was because the ACLU. What do they have them standing in the committee room?
They're giving them the talking points.
Yeah. Oh, okay.
Okay.
Because one of them stood up and you could see he was clearly reading, so he knew what he was supposed to say.
Yeah,
it was
they had
very
talking
well
points.
orchestrated.
It was well orchestrated, absolutely, yes.
I guess, and the one thing that Ann Donahue mentioned, and just for the viewers, Ann Donahue represents Northfield and Berlin, did a spectacular job, as she always does. She had several amendments, explained them beautifully on the floor, and they went down in a blaze of glory. But only the Republicans, before the debate started, had a caucus. So Ann could explain
Her amendments.
her amendment to the caucus. And normally, when you have contentious amendments, you get to go talk to the Democrats and the progressives at their caucus so they can understand. Ann did get the chance to talk to the committee, but not to the full caucus. And they didn't have it on purpose because they weren't going to listen. So why bother?
Right.
Why waste anybody's time?
In all fairness, what's really happening at the State House is that there is an unbalance of power.
Right.
It's a massive supermajority of
Right.
progressives and
Right.
Democrats. And whenever that happens, things are not well done. I
Right.
mean, if the Republicans had somehow had a massive
Oh, yeah,
majority,
we did.
you start to abuse the
Right.
process, start to
Right.
cut the corners, and so that is just a lack of
Right.
that respect for each side, because now it's a runaway train.
Now, there's a lot of things that that are not in this bill, that just for the protection of a lot of people should be in the bill. Could you talk a little bit about what's not in the bill, whether it be the late-term abortion? There's a whole list here that you have on your website, and there's no anesthesia for the unborn baby. I mean, there's
That one's important to stop for a second and understand that now medicine is so advanced, and I'd like to also slip in. You triggered it when you were talking, Joe, that this is a whole nother world since 1973. Now all of us grandparents have beautiful ultrasound
right,
pictures of it,
right.
and we all identify more.
Right.
And so this is why I think there's a new wave that the inside the building isn't understanding. That we're a lot more connected to that
Right.
unborn child. We know male, female. We've got names already, or a choice
have
of
these
names.
parties of
and
yellow,
parties, yeah,
pink
where they
and
do
blue.
yep, is it boy or girl? So that's all going on. But it's important to understand that science is so advanced at this point, and they're moving viability back. Now we're saying 24 weeks here. That's
Right.
just a safe point, but they can save babies at 20 weeks.
Right.
If they are doing surgery though in utero, which
Right.
is becoming common, they can open up the uterus. To repair the spine,
Right,
to
the
do
spina bifida,
or heart, yeah.
right?
And so they always make sure that baby has anesthesia. There's enough to make sure the baby is
Right.
not, because they recognize that baby can feel pain at that point.
But there's nothing in the bill that mandates this, so it's up to
Well,
good
and
practice if the.
So there's nothing in the bill that mandates that during a late-term abortion,
Right.
the unborn baby gets anesthesia.
Okay. So they talked some of these bills that they were back and forth yesterday and today. They went from waiting period, but I didn't think that would. I didn't think that would pass. And,
Yeah,
none
it
of them
didn't.
passed.
nothing passed.
Making sure the woman sees the MRI and hearing the heartbeat,
The
that might change
Yeah,
their
ultrasound,
Thank
right.
you. And then, of course, the old parental consent, which I don't know about you all, but if I was a parent, I'd for sure want to know where my child was.
Well, there's a
cons-
difference between consent
Yeah.
and notification.
Right.
And notification is the argument today against that was that, well, there's this thin line between notification and consent, but you know what? That's just another way of
Right.
distorting the reality of what's going
Right,
on here.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, to think that a child who's 12 to 17 or 18 years old should not be encouraged to talk to her parents,
Right,
or the
right.
parents shouldn't be notified, so there can be a collaborative decision made,
Right.
or a decision made with the support of the parents, because some parents are abusive, and
Right.
no doubt there's some parents in some families who are not going to be helpful in this situation to the
Yeah.
child. But to basically say that no notification is necessary is really crazy to me.
And
I mean,
the
it's
way
taking it
this
to
thing
another
reads,
extreme.
it's like after the abortion, if it's abusive, if there's a criminal, an act that's happened, if it's been a
Human trafficking,
yeah.
abusive boyfriend, an
Yeah.
uncle
Yeah,
who's
the old-
covering
Aren't
up
Planned
things, that's him.
Parenthood providers mandatory reporters, if that's the case?
Because where does the guy get put in jail and get arrested? Where does that happen?
So they're mandatory reporters, but in 2001, when we were examining parental notification and it passed in the House, we found out that Planned Parenthood hadn't made a report of abuse under the Mandatory Reporting
Oh,
of Abuse
really?
Act for over 10 years.
Right.
And so not only that, the child they have to ask, inquire, and get the answer. And I will be happy to say I don't believe that's happening.
Right.
They on the floor today, trusting women of all ages, so a 12-year-old is a woman, to make their own decision. So they argue against even trying to find out and discover. Now, I'm sure they make some reports of abuse, but do they always really work to detect that? Now, here's the other thing that's really important. After the abortion, that tissue is DNA proof of a crime.
Right.
And you spare her all kinds of court trials and
Right,
everything else.
right.
If it's the uncle, let's find out.
Yep.
And
Can't
let's-
argue DNA,
you
as
can't
they
argue
say on
DNA.
CSI. So
This is the kind of thing that, going back to what Mary was saying, this is the kind of thing that is so important and really needs to reflect the values of our culture that we should take our time with. And the gun to everybody's head, they believe, is this what's going on in Washington, so they're rushing it through. But parental notification, for example, a thoughtful, deliberative,
Right.
well-vetted, policy proposal could be put together
Right.
to meet all the concerns about that, so that the parents that really should know about this, who are good parents, but because of the child's fear of disappointment or disapproval, or because of some boyfriend's threat to the child, can be mitigated and factored into the equation.
Right.
And then there could be ways to take the abusive, inappropriate parents and families out of the equation.
Right.
So, I mean, that can be accomplished and done. There's a lot of human services policies that have gone through that kind of
And they're so upset about a child
process.
having to go to court. Well, what's more upsetting, having your father the child that you're carrying, or having some, they kept talking strangers, like judges
know.
had no way of knowing how to deal with kids.
This really
in
reminds
family
me of the
court.
process where, watching the legislature, reminds me of the process where if you don't want to hear it, I'm going to make up 3 or 4 different reasons why it's not going to work.
Right.
But it's not going to be about the logic of what you're saying. It's
Right.
going to be about me
right.
making sure
Right.
that I discount everything you're saying, because I'm just going to make up all the reasons, and I'm going to get partners. I'm going to get all these institutions that have a bias. Have a bias. Listen to the paradox here. The ACLU, this is a human rights group,
Right, who?
but because of the dehumanization of the fetus,
right.
is not
Right,
recognized.
that's right. It's all about the woman.
I mean, it's
And
a
the
bizarre.
Human Rights Commission.
And the Human Rights,
testified.
it's a bizarre conundrum and paradox to me. I just can't,
Yeah, no.
I can't reconcile it in my brain.
The Human Rights Commission
The
came
Human
out
Rights
against
Commission,
this?
yes, testified again for the bill.
And that's
This is getting more depressing.
that's what I'm really, this is about dehumanization.
You're exactly right.
And who's next? Us older folks, Joe.
I do want to say, to explain that that the parental notification bill in 2001, which Representative Ann Donahue explained today on the floor as an amendment, involves probate court judges. And so that is an experience that is entirely unthreatening. A probate
For
court
sure.
judge could pick a young girl up and then go have coffee and just have a
Right,
chat
right.
and try to get down a little bit.
Right.
And then most importantly, there's someone out there who understands that she may have made that decision to go ahead without her parents. The probate judge concurs. She's got someone to check on her to make sure, because as we
Right.
were discussing, these do not always go well, these
Right, I'm
abortions.
sure not.
And for a young
It
girl
doesn't
to-
have to be in the formal,
Right, no.
sterile,
No.
impersonal nature of the court either.
Yep.
The court could have that's what I mean. The court could have a proxy that's a social worker
For sure,
or
a
an
guardian
independent.
ad litem.
Yeah,
right?
or an
They're
independent,
wonderful.
or a trained independent
Yeah.
person that can get the trust
Yeah.
and relate to or even a peer
Yeah.
that can get the
But
trust
the
to relate.
courts even apparently testified against doing anything like this, right?
That's right. The court
So
system.
where
if you-
is
It's all
our
in
courts?
lockstep. It's all in lockstep.
But
Yep.
why? I'm just
They
sorry.
apparently complained about workload.
Oh, poor babies.
You know, I mean, you know, if you have a construct or a policy proposal like that was in the language I read today for parental notification, and you're going to get testimony to that particular paradigm,
Blah, blah, blah.
there's going to be problems to it unless you bring the courts into the equation
Right.
to help create
Right.
the model.
Right.
So that, okay, how can this work for you if you want to use the courts?
Which is why Ann changed the effective date to January 2020.
Right, you're right.
Yeah.
So she recognized that.
Yeah, so it's a nuance of really creative strategy to really make
Right.
this not work
Right.
by the legislature who opposes any restrictions to this bill.
Well, we've gotten national attention, so good for us.
We have?
Again. Yeah, we
Yeah.
have. So, Mayor, next is the Senate. Sadly, probably this is going to pass
Sure.
without amendments. And next is the Senate. Have we, I think, I've learned a few things that maybe they've given away from their comments about things that we could present to them. You know, they said they don't want this, they don't want that, but that sort of opens up the door. Well, what have they left out? What do they want? So maybe there's a way to and I think that on the parental notification, it's 1 out of five states do have parental notification.
Only 5 states don't have a
thank you.
requirement.
So all the
yeah.
rest have parental notification of some sort.
Of some kind, some
Yeah.
consent,
Yeah.
some
Yeah.
2 parents, some 1 parent. So it's a patchwork of, but it's a reflection of how that is considered. And in fact, our Supreme Court outlined very clearly that parents have the rights and responsibilities for the care of their children.
Yes, they
I mean,
do.
their schooling, their medical care, and all these things, and that's in our that's the Supreme Court
Right,
ruling.
right.
So we used that when we were passing the parental notification law, but that's just been
Well, I'm assuming there's some kind of a lawsuit that could be presented. There seems to be just a few things that are not quite kosher with the rules and the Constitution. I really don't want to see this in our Constitution and say, you know,
well, okay.
Vermont,
That
open
hasn't
door.
started yet.
No, that's that S.
So this is sort of a test the water. This
Yeah.
H57 and S25
Right.
are a test the water for the constitutional amendment. Well, sadly, with the way these amendments are going down and the entire opposition fight is losing,
Right.
I think they're going to be emboldened to go with the constitutional amendment.
I think that things don't look really. Things look pretty dark, actually.
They do.
So how do
politically.
we get these folks to pay attention? Because I think there are more people that are offended by this whole thing and pretty embarrassed to live here.
I think that, you know, one of the things that was said somewhere along the line here was that nothing that in this bill, once it's passed, can't be changed by another legislature.
Right.
So I think that, you know, a couple of years from now,
Yeah, we get that.
when the current administration in Washington is hopefully in some
Right.
other dimension,
I know.
and the fear factor is lowered,
Right.
more thoughtful people will be in the legislature who can take a more middle-of-the-road, inclusive approach to preserving the right to choice, but also preserving some of the rights of the unborn, unwanted
Right.
child, and in a more thoughtful way. I think that's what we're going to be looking at up the road, because we're not
Yeah.
going to.
This
We're
group
not-
isn't budging.
we're-
And I said
yeah,
this
we're
to
not gonna-
both of you on the public hearing where we had many people there, way more against than for. Once we started referring to God, and I'm saying this publicly, to God and to the, you know, quotes from the Bible, just turn them right off. They just right over your head.
Well,
You
the
know,
other thing
Bible
that-
thumping whoever.
Well, the other thing too is that if you even put God aside, and you talk to this group about the idea, I like to say fact, but the idea that what's really going on here is, you know, an abortion of an evolving fetus that's going to become a life and a child is really infanticide.
Right, for sure.
And once you say that, the
Yeah.
door also closes
Yeah,
to
for
us.
sure. You were telling me that you
People
say
don't
murder.
want to. People don't want to hear that either. So
Yep.
where do you
That's right.
begin the conversation,
Right.
so that you can go, okay, well, forget about God and forget about
Yep.
infanticide.
You're right.
Let's
Yeah.
talk about. We're on board with a woman's choice, but let's take it from there and talk about
Right.
what else we
What does
can
that
do
mean? Right.
to limit the amount of abortions, and advocate for the lives that could be
Right.
preserved if we had more capacity in our adoption, if we had better birth control, if we had parental notification. Well, that's restricting it, you know, somehow in my brain.
Right.
Well,
Right?
you know,
Everything
so we
was
go
restricting.
back to this loop where anything that you say is going to, all those amendments got shot down
But
today
they
in the name
also
of
say, Joe,
restricting.
and Mary, they say this never happens.
It's not true.
We've never had a late-term abortion. And so I said to them, well, then put it in the bill.
right.
You're not losing anything. We're
Yeah.
not taking it. If it's never, ever,
Yeah.
ever happened.
That goes
then-
back to what I said
right.
before, which is that, you know, it's another way of, I don't want to hear it,
Right.
so I'm just going to make this
Right.
up and I'm going
It's
to,
like that, blah, blah,
I
blah.
don't want to hear it.
They also say over and over, Planned Parenthood repeatedly says that they make sure that that the young minors have told their parents, and that they're, you know, 90% of the
That's
time
just
they're.
nonsense.
So again, though, if that's the case, why can't they support?
It's like, put it in the bill.
Put it in the law.
You know, I used an expression on Facebook about this, and it was, give them an inch, and they'll take a mile. Roe versus Wade was an inch.
and they're
Vermont's a
taking a
mile.
mile.
They're just taking it to the extreme. Why can't we just do Roe versus Wade and just leave it? Because that's the law of the land. Just
Well,
copy that.
there's a number of other factors too at play here. One is, you know, women see themselves as victims of men who are have always been dominant in our culture, have always been oppressive in many, many ways. I mean, the fact that women couldn't vote
Right.
until, you
Right,
know,
right.
fairly recently in our
Right.
history is true. I mean,
Right.
it's a fact, and so you have to understand that you have to put as a man, I have to put myself in their place, and get that, that is, you know, this is one way of drawing a line, and I get
Right.
that, and I have to respect it. So that's one thing that's going on here that's compelling, and that has to be, and you know, if you're going to talk about humanization and not dehumanization, you have to get that as a man and understand that that's part of the equation. But then on the other hand, this is a complicated situation because a fetus is going to become a life,
Right.
and you've got to go, well, what about that?
Yeah.
And how do we factor that into the equation? So there's a lot of forces here at play.
And we haven't even talked about the babies who make it through the abortion and are alive on
Well,
the table.
that's the other factor, many factors, but that's the other compelling factor. Once you see the eyes and the parts
Yeah, right.
and the humanization of the fetus, you can't look away.
No.
I mean, you can look away, but it's hard to look away and continue to dehumanize this process,
right.
because that's what's so weird about this whole thing, is that if you can't see it, it doesn't exist in your brain, so you can just dispose of it and move on with your life. I think you're right, though. I think there's a lot of
becoming
remorse.
And the shocking thing is, so what you're saying too is that we have to recognize that women have felt oppressed, but we're looking at the age of Me Too. So why would we ever want to cover up the abuse that may be happening to women with an abortion and putting all that on her? I've also talked to
Good
women.
point, Mary.
Well, it's huge because we just saw this national Me Too where women are way too abused,
Right.
and they're covering it up, and then they leave with feelings of less than because
They
you
made me do
carry
it.
that. I
Yeah.
mean, that's not I will say with all confidence that the day a woman has an abortion is the worst day of her life, and when it's surrounded by pressure and the feeling that you have had no
choice,
choices,
right.
we should be trying to take that burden off her and eliminate that, and really make sure we've sat down and squarely had a discussion with her about it. But so the Me Too movement but making women feel like the baby's their adversary instead of how can we help you both?
Right.
You know, it doesn't have to be that this baby's affecting your life, it's a negative impact.
Right.
So just so that you understand and your viewers understand, the Governor's Commission on Women testified in committee that abortion is very important to a woman's her economic future. So the younger she has a baby, the more that impacts.
Right.
And she walked through waiting till after college, getting your career underway. But the best economic impact for a woman is never to have any children. So that's a Governor's Commission on Women.
Wonderful.
I know, and so that's
Good
a
thing
way
I'm
that
not
they've
governor, they'd be
made.
gone.
Well, but we
Sorry.
all had children when we
Yeah,
were
right,
poor.
of course.
Who didn't?
But they make your life.
They-
It's
they're-
called
yeah.
a family, and we all
It's
need
called the
that.
happiness
Yes,
factor.
exactly.
You know, so here's our Governor's Commission on Women, funded again with our taxpayer dollars, coming in to testify as if that baby is your adversary.
Right.
Well, that's really a reflection of values.
Yeah.
It is.
It really is, and I get that. You know,
all
if you get
screwed
pregnant at 17, it's going to hijack your life economically for a while.
For a while.
But there's been people that have happened to, and they've done okay. They've had
A
this,
very dear friend of mine who is in Washington, D.C., actually, she could never understand. She married too early, had 3 kids right away, and one of those, oh my God, my life is sinking. Husband was abusive, and they wound up divorcing, and then she wound up with ovarian cancer, and those were the only kids she was ever going to have.
Oh, wow.
So she's still alive. She survived her cancer, but still, it's that you can look back later and say, well, now I know why.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
So if we could just minimize this, the best answer is abortion. That's what we heard all day on the floor. The best answer is abortion, right?
yeah, and I mean that's very narrow.
It's narrow.
I was
thinking.
very, as you said, you know some of these people, I do too, and my opinions have been a little rough around the edges, a little burnt. I'm just very surprised. And some of
It's-
them who are doctors
Yeah.
really surprised me. Yesterday's testimony
I know.
by one doctor in particular, just,
Yeah.
I was like, whoa, I'm glad he's not mine.
Well, you know, you can take any statement and just make up, select what you want from the work you do, even if you're a
Right,
doctor, and
right.
put it in there and make it work for you as a counter argument
Yeah,
to this.
because you're a
Exactly right.
doctor, so it must be true.
But it
They take
really,
one narrow
it
case.
is surreal, though. I mean,
Yeah.
I know these people, and they've been so helpful in the past with all the work I've done.
Yeah.
The Reach Up program
For
and
sure.
corrections, and micro business for community
Right.
action, and all helping people to
Yeah.
get a leg up and
Yeah.
move on with their lives in a really good, positive way. But when it comes to this subject, it's like talking to a completely different group of people.
Right, exactly.
And it's surreal. It's just
We've got to
twists my
find the
brain.
root cause of this, and I don't know what it is. Mary, we only have about 7 minutes left, and I wanted to talk about, you've put out this Life in Vermont flyer,
Yes.
and you said it's the biggest outreach that you've done. And first, we want to thank you for all your work, and
Well,
thank
thank
Joe,
you.
too, for a lot of people are jumping in on this, so thank you. But tell us a little bit about the flyer and what you hope to do when this thing hits the Senate.
You mean, our
So-
next strategy, so we have an
Yeah.
inside the State House and an outside the State House.
Yeah.
We have a Vermont Right to Life Educational Trust Fund, and the goal basically is to uphold the sanctity of human life from conception until natural death. We are sometimes mischaracterized as wanting to ban all abortions. There hasn't been a bill
Right.
trying to do that we have worked for, probably for 30 years. Because the point is that we want women to, and the people in their lives, to freely choose to have life.
Right.
That abortion, the understanding of abortion, what it means, the development of an unborn child, the alternatives, have saturated the culture to the point where women wouldn't think of having one, men wouldn't pressure them into it, and medical professionals would be
Right.
offering them other choices. So to that end, we've done 3 or 4 years now of Life in Vermont flyers that
great.
are in every single newspaper in the state. So we reached 220,000 households the last
That's
time we
great.
put them in.
Good. Maybe
And
that's why we are winning the outside the state house, or
maybe.
you're winning
Well,
them.
we're trying, but it's
Yeah.
a very positive approach. There's not a negative. There's not
Right.
descriptions. There's no pictures of aborted babies. It's just this positive view, like you were just touched by the idea that the heart is beating so early.
Right.
That's one of our most powerful
I
things.
had no idea.
Yeah. Well, even there's just so many people who don't. So
Right.
it is detectable at 6 weeks with an ultrasound or a instrument, but that little heart, you can just imagine. There's no cell division. There's no nothing that can happen until
Right.
the little rudimentary heart is beginning to pump blood.
Maybe they should see the pictures. Joe and I were talking about something stark to get their attention, to wake them up. Maybe we're being too nice.
I just think that it's too bad that we human beings seem to be binary. You're either pro-choice
right.
or you're pro-life, pro-gun, anti-gun. I mean, I really like to be considered part of the caucus that is pro-life and pro-choice.
Right,
And
well-
I know that sounds like
Well, that's always been me.
I mean,
sort of,
that's
until
like-
Yeah,
this.
we
people
have
go,
a unique
huh? How can you
understanding
be both?
about
Well,
that.
you can.
Yeah, you can. And especially, I don't think, in all due respect of women who are pregnant who want an abortion are going to get one, whether
It's legal or not.
it's legal. They're going to do
I
it.
totally understand
So
that.
they're going to do it, and I knew 2 of them, and they knew the risks, and they went because to them the alternative of living with their families and all the things that would happen to them in the immediacy, not about sending a kid to college, what would happen to them
I know,
today when they
right.
walk, they're going to get an abortion.
But we've been here before.
Yeah.
And we've been here with slavery, where the Supreme Court decided that a black man was the
Right.
and women were the property of a slave owner.
Right.
And it took a war, but it didn't even end then.
No.
You
Still going
had to have a culture that understood it was not only wrong to own a slave, it was wrong to be a slave.
Yeah.
So there were some that wanted to still
all
be on,
legal, right?
Well, even after it was made illegal,
Yeah.
you have because you have to change the culture. So we
Right.
understand that. When we're in the State House advocating for parental notification and other laws, we're trying to do 2 things: explain so that parents understand they may not be told. They have to be understanding that their child may come home acting like a stranger to them, carrying. I had a friend whose daughter cried for days and days and days, and they had to figure out. Take some steps back. Remember a trip to Burlington, and no shopping got done, and then they began to put the pieces together. Now that's too late to
right,
find out,
right.
and the child was devastated. So we're trying to make people aware, and I'm going to be honest. We're going to expose how far over those who are leading the so-called pro-choice movement will find themselves, and they're exposing that at the State House now.
Yeah, yeah.
So when we are in the State House, we have several categories. We sort of rank pro-life, pro-life friendly, pro-choice, and pro-abortion. And so we can work with the first 3.
Right.
But when it's a lockstep with no reason,
Right.
no give, we
And no
just can't.
answers.
And
They
no answers.
cannot answer. Yesterday, one of the representatives asked a question to somebody who couldn't answer it, so she passed it over to the other representative, who just looked at the one asking the question and said yes. I'm like, what? This is called a discussion and a debate. She just said yes, and that was that. That was her
Yeah.
answer.
Well, I think
And so the guy was standing there like, what to do now?
Well, I think that, Ann Donahue was right. People have made their minds up. This is one of those house, there wasn't a house debate.
No.
People had made their minds
Yep.
up, and they came with their minds made up, and they weren't going to change their
Right,
minds.
right.
So,
So why have the public hearing and all the, I mean, it's just sad. Just,
I do think that was a sign that there was a lot of pressure coming from the public.
oh, and they were
I think
paying
that was the
attention.
escape valve. Look, we'll have a public hearing, but then we're going to get right back
They
to
should
what we
all
were
show up with the word, "We are not voting for you." That
no, I
would
think
get
it was
them.
done because so that the powers to be in charge right now could say,
Could say,
everybody
listen.
had a say,
Yeah,
so
Right.
we're done.
right. So we have 2 minutes. Is there anything that we should say other than, how can these people help?
Who are listening?
Yeah,
I'll defer to you, Joe.
I don't have a real easy answer for this. Like I said, it just occurred to me having this conversation that there should be another category, which is pro-life, pro-choice, not just
Right.
one or the other.
right.
And I guess my real big question is, where's the governor on this?
He
Because
used to be pro-life, pro-choice, because
Yeah.
he and I were exactly the same.
Yeah.
3 months parental notification, and now we got 100% from Planned Parenthood
Yeah.
from their survey, which meant he answered questions differently than I would have.
Yeah, but somebody,
So-
there has to be, I think there has to be somebody in elected who reflects, not just one perspective on this.
Right.
And it's going to be down to him, even if he can't win this and pick this fight and win it, because he's going to be, there's a supermajority in both chambers. He can at least make a statement of
Right.
values and
Right.
take a
To
stand
me,
on
he's
it.
lost a lot of opportunity, because this bill hasn't changed one iota in a long time.
That
and
that
so-
tells me that he doesn't really want to be in the mix.
Exactly. So, but he has to.
Well,
And there you go.
It's
But
up to him.
Back to what you said really quickly, because we're almost out of time, but the floor debate was led by the pro-life, pro-choice people, really.
Mm-hmm.
It was not the pro-lifers who led the floor fight. Bob, several of the ones who stood up to fight the hardest
Yeah.
are pro-choice.
Really.
Yeah.
But they
Yeah,
had
well.
that they had that
Yeah,
instinctive
they're just trying to
respect.
put some parameters around
Right.
it.
It's the 9 months. I can't even. I tell the story.
Yeah.
My daughter, she was so externally overly large and normal, and we always said, "Oh, she came out helping the doctor," and that's what's in my head. I mean, one breath and we're alive and ready to get going. So
At the end of the day, you kind of have to live with yourself, and I really think that if people really were honest with themselves about this across the board, they would know it's morally wrong.
yeah, right.
But they're basically taking this to a place where they see it as protection, and so they're letting that trump
They know,
the
which is why they don't want to
conversation.
hear about God or about murder or about him.
Well, you can even take God out of the equation. It's just
right,
morally wrong to
morally
take
wrong,
life,
Right. There you
and
go.
and
Well,
and at least
We are out of time, and I thank you both. I know this was a tough
Nice.
day,
Yeah.
and we'll see what happens when you go back. It may still be talking. Who knows? Thank you all for
Thank you for having
listening.
us.
As I said, we'll have Lucy LaRiche from Planned Parenthood on next week. But in the meantime, keep listening beyond the sound bites.